The sweet aroma of freshly baked garlic bread and marinara sauce filled the air at Angelo's, a cozy Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of downtown Los Angeles. Known for its homemade pasta and warm atmosphere, the restaurant had been a local favorite for over 30 years. The pale yellow walls were decorated with black and white photographs of old Hollywood, and soft jazz music played in the background, creating the perfect ambience for a relaxing dinner. It was a particularly busy Thursday evening in spring, just as the sun was setting and casting long shadows through the restaurant's large front windows. The kind of evening where the weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold, making everyone in the city want to dine out. The small restaurant was buzzing with the cheerful noise of clinking glasses, laughter, and dozens of conversations blending together. Keanu Reeves had just finished a long day of filming his latest movie. He'd been on set since dawn, performing his own stunts as usual, and now his muscles ached pleasantly from the physical exertion. Rather than heading to one of those fancy Hollywood restaurants where celebrities were expected to be seen, he decided to stop at Angelo's. He'd discovered the place by chance a few months ago and had fallen in love with their simple but delicious food and the way they treated him like any other customer. He parked his motorcycle around the corner, removed his helmet, and ran his fingers through his slightly messy black hair. The cool evening breeze felt good against his face as he walked the short distance to the restaurant. He was wearing a well-worn black leather jacket, dark jeans, and boots, comfortable clothes that helped him blend in with the crowd. As he pushed open the heavy wooden door, the little bell above it chimed softly. The familiar warmth and appetizing smells of the restaurant welcomed him, making his stomach rumble. He hadn't eaten since the quick sandwich he'd grabbed during lunch break, and he was looking forward to a plate of Angelo's famous spaghetti and meatballs. The restaurant was more crowded than he'd ever seen it. Every table was occupied with families, couples, and groups of friends enjoying their meals. The wooden floors creaked slightly under his feet as he made his way past the busy tables, nodding politely to people who glanced his way. Most were too engaged in their conversations and meals to notice him, which was exactly how he preferred it. Near the window, there was a long communal table, something Angelo's was known for. It was where solo diners could sit together and often led to interesting conversations between strangers who came in alone but left having made new friends. There appeared to be one empty seat left at this table, a wooden chair with a red cushion that looked particularly inviting after his long day. The rest of the seats at the communal table were occupied by an elderly couple sharing a large pizza, a young woman working on her laptop while eating a salad, and a middle-aged woman in a business suit who had spread her belongings across two seats. The woman in the suit was talking loudly on her phone about some business meeting, her half-eaten plate of fettuccine pushed to the side. Mrs. Chen, the restaurant owner's wife, was bustling around with plates of steaming pasta, her gray hair neatly tied back in a bun. She'd owned the restaurant with her husband for decades, after moving to Los Angeles from Hong Kong with dreams of creating a place where good food could bring people together. She caught Keanu's eye and gave him a warm smile. She always remembered her regulars, no matter how famous they might be. The smell of fresh basil and garlic grew stronger as a waiter passed by with a tray full of caprese salads. Keanu's stomach growled again, and he decided to make his way toward that empty seat at the communal table. He'd eaten there before and enjoyed the casual, friendly atmosphere. Little did he know that this ordinary evening was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would end up touching the lives of everyone in the restaurant and beyond. The evening sun continued to stream through the large windows, creating a warm, golden glow throughout the restaurant. The shadows were growing longer, and the streetlights outside were just beginning to flicker on. It was that magical time of day when the city was transitioning from its busy workday to a more relaxed evening pace. The perfect time for a quiet dinner, or so he thought. As Keanu approached the empty chair, he could feel the eyes of a few other diners on him. Some had that look of trying to place where they'd seen him before, while others were completely absorbed in their own worlds. He reached for the back of the chair, ready to sit down and enjoy a peaceful meal. But what happened next would turn this ordinary evening into something none of the diners would ever forget. Just as Keanu's hand touched the back of the empty chair, the woman in the business suit looked up from her phone call. Her face immediately twisted into an expression of disapproval, her perfectly lined lips pressing into a thin frown. Without missing a beat in her conversation, she swung her designer handbag from the floor and placed it firmly on the empty seat, making her intentions crystal clear. "I'll have to call you back," she said into her phone, her voice sharp and clipped. She ended the call and turned her attention to Keanu, who had politely pulled his hand back from the chair. The restaurant's warm chatter seemed to dim slightly, as if the air itself could sense the tension building at the communal table. "This seat is taken," she announced loudly, adjusting her bag to take up more space. Her voice carried across the nearby tables, causing several diners to glance up from their meals. The young woman with the laptop slowly closed her screen, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth as she watched the scene unfold. The woman continued, her voice getting progressively louder. "I don't want any," she paused, looking Keanu up and down with obvious disdain, "people like you sitting here. I've heard about how you people behave in restaurants." Her emphasis on "you people" made it clear she was referring to his mixed Asian heritage, her prejudice as obvious as the pearl necklace gleaming at her throat. The elderly couple sharing the pizza exchanged uncomfortable glances, the husband setting down his slice and wiping his hands slowly on his napkin. Around them, other diners began to shift in their seats, some turning to watch more openly now, others pretending to be absorbed in their phones while stealing glances at the unfolding situation. A young waiter nearby nearly dropped his tray of drinks, caught between his duty to serve and his instinct to intervene. The ice in the glasses clinked nervously as he steadied himself, uncertain whether to step in or seek help from management. The tension in the air was as thick as the steam rising from the plates of pasta being served at nearby tables. The woman's voice grew even louder as she continued her tirade. "I'm trying to enjoy my dinner in peace. There are plenty of other places you can go." She gestured vaguely toward the door, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "I'm sure there's a more appropriate establishment for someone like you." The young woman with the laptop had now completely abandoned any pretense of working, her face reflecting a mix of shock and disgust at what she was witnessing. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but before she could, the woman cut her off with a sharp glare. "Mind your own business," she snapped, before turning back to Keanu. "I've been coming here for years, and I won't have my dinner ruined." This was clearly a lie. Mrs. Chen, who was watching from near the kitchen door, had never seen this woman before in her life. The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter now, the usual dinner buzz replaced by tense whispers and the occasional clink of silverware. Even the jazz music playing softly in the background seemed to have faded into insignificance. The setting sun cast long shadows across the wooden floor, adding to the dramatic tension of the moment. Through it all, Keanu remained standing quietly, his posture relaxed but dignified. His face showed no anger, no frustration, just a calm, almost contemplative expression that seemed to unnerve the woman even more. His hands were loosely at his sides, his warm leather jacket and casual attire standing in stark contrast to the woman's expensive business suit. The woman's face had grown slightly flushed, whether from embarrassment at making a scene or anger at Keanu's lack of reaction, it wasn't clear. She began rummaging in her bag, as if looking for something to further claim her territory, her movements sharp and aggressive. The elderly couple were now whispering to each other in hushed tones, the wife occasionally shaking her head in disapproval, not at Keanu, but at the woman's behavior. Other diners had stopped eating entirely, their forks suspended in midair as they watched the scene unfold. The smells of garlic and tomato sauce still wafted through the air, but they seemed out of place now, like a cheerful song playing at a funeral. The warmth and coziness of Angelo's had been temporarily replaced by an atmosphere of tension and disbelief. As the woman continued her inappropriate behavior, it was clear that this situation was about to reach a turning point, though not in the way she expected. The sound of a chair scraping against the wooden floor broke through the tension. Someone was about to step in, and the next few moments would transform this uncomfortable confrontation into something none of the diners would ever forget. The woman's actions were about to backfire in a way she never could have anticipated, and the evening was far from over. What happened next would leave a lasting impression on everyone in Angelo's that evening. Instead of responding with anger or matching the woman's hostile energy, Keanu did something unexpected. He smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile or a forced one, but a genuine, warm expression that seemed to soften the very air around him. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice carrying a gentle tone that somehow managed to cut through the tension better than any shout could have. "No worries at all." He took a small step back from the table, maintaining his relaxed posture and calm demeanor. The woman blinked, clearly thrown off by this response. She had been braced for an argument, perhaps even hoping for one, but Keanu's peaceful reaction left her with nowhere to direct her negativity. Her hands, which had been tightly gripping her handbag, loosened slightly in confusion. The young woman with the laptop watched in amazement, her coffee growing cold beside her forgotten work. The elderly couple exchanged knowing looks. They had just witnessed a masterclass in handling conflict with grace. Around the restaurant, other diners who had been watching the scene unfold began to murmur quietly among themselves, many nodding in approval at Keanu's response. He moved away from the communal table, choosing to stand near one of the restaurant's brick walls. The wall was decorated with old black and white photographs of the city, and he began to study them with genuine interest, as if he had all the time in the world. His leather jacket caught the warm light from the overhead lamps, and his relaxed stance made it seem like he was exactly where he meant to be. The aroma of fresh bread continued to waft through the air as a waiter emerged from the kitchen with a basket of garlic nuts. The simple, homey smell seemed to underscore the ridiculousness of the woman's behavior in contrast to Keanu's dignity. Some diners were now openly staring at her rather than him, their expressions ranging from disapproval to embarrassment on her behalf. A young child at a nearby table tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered something that made the mother smile and nod. The simple wisdom of children, often seeing straight through adult prejudices, hung in the air like an unspoken lesson. Minutes ticked by, marked by the gentle clicking of cutlery and the soft background music. Keanu remained by the wall, occasionally shifting his weight, but never showing any sign of impatience or annoyance. He pulled out his phone at one point, not to make a show of being busy, but simply to check the time with the same casual ease he'd shown throughout the encounter. The woman at the table kept glancing his way, her initial righteousness beginning to crack under the weight of his graceful response. Her food had gone cold, and she pushed it around her plate with increasing agitation. The space she'd so aggressively claimed with her handbag now seemed to mock her, an empty testament to empty prejudices. Other customers who came into the restaurant would pause at the door, sensing the unusual atmosphere. They'd look around, trying to understand why some areas of the dining room were so quiet while others buzzed with hushed conversations. The story was already spreading from table to table through whispered explanations and subtle nods in Keanu's direction. A teenager who had been sitting with his family stood up to get a better look at Keanu, suddenly realizing why the man seemed so familiar. His eyes widened with recognition, and he quickly sat back down, urgently whispering to his parents. The ripple of recognition was about to spread through the restaurant like a wave. Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen again, carrying a steaming plate of pasta. She paused, taking in the scene. The woman at the communal table now looking increasingly uncomfortable, Keanu standing peacefully by the wall, and the rest of her customers watching it all unfold. Her expression showed clearly that she had made a decision about how to handle the situation. The sun had almost completely set now, and the restaurant's warm lighting had taken over, creating pools of golden light that seemed to highlight the contrast between hatred and dignity playing out in her establishment. The woman's expensive suit and jewelry seemed less impressive now, overshadowed by Keanu's simple but powerful display of character. As Mrs. Chen approached with purpose in her step, it was clear that Keanu's dignified response had set the stage for what was about to happen next. His choice to meet discrimination with kindness had created a moment that would soon transform from an ugly display of prejudice into something entirely unexpected, a lesson that everyone present would remember for years to come. Mrs. Chen walked through her restaurant with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades creating a welcoming space for all. Her small frame carried an unmistakable authority as she approached the communal table, her comfortable black shoes making soft sounds against the wooden floor. The steam from the pasta she carried created a small cloud around her, like a gentle aura. She set the pasta down at another table as she passed, patting the customer's shoulder with the familiar warmth she was known for. Then she straightened her simple blue apron and made her way to where the woman sat with her handbag, still claiming the empty chair. "Excuse me," Mrs. Chen said, her voice clear and steady. Despite her slight accent, each word carried the weight of 30 years of running this establishment. In my restaurant, we have 2 rules. First, we serve good food. Second, we respect every person who walks through that door. The woman's face flushed a deeper shade of red as she realized all eyes were now on her. She opened her mouth to speak, but Mrs. Chen gently raised her hand, a gesture that somehow managed to be both firm and kind at the same time. I have watched you turn away a kind man because of how he looks, Mrs. Chen continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the now quiet restaurant. That is not what we do here. This is not who we are. Around the restaurant, other diners began to voice their support. The elderly man at the communal table cleared his throat and spoke up, his voice carrying the wisdom of his years. Young lady, I fought in a war to stop people from treating others this way. What you're doing here, it's not right. The young woman with the laptop closed it completely now and sat up straighter. I've been sitting here the whole time, she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. That gentleman did nothing to deserve such treatment. Nothing. From other tables, more voices joined in. A group of college students who had been celebrating a birthday put down their forks. One of them stood up, speaking with the passionate idealism of youth. We've been watching, and honestly, it's embarrassing to see someone act this way in 2025. The woman's carefully maintained composure began to crack. She looked around the restaurant, perhaps truly seeing for the first time how her actions appeared to others. Her handbag slid slightly on the empty chair, no longer marking territory but instead seeming to shrink away from the spotlight. A waiter who had been hesitating nearby finally stepped forward. He was young, probably working his way through college, and his voice shook slightly but grew stronger as he spoke. I serve people at this table every day. I've seen strangers become friends here. What you're doing, it goes against everything this place stands for. The restaurant's usual cheerful buzz had transformed into something more meaningful, a community standing together. The walls seemed to hold their breath, decades of shared meals and conversations witnessing this moment of collective conscience. Mrs. Chen glanced over at Keanu, who was still standing quietly by the wall, his presence somehow both understated and powerful. She gave him a small, apologetic smile before turning back to the woman. In my restaurant, Mrs. Chen said, her voice now gentle but unwavering, we believe food brings people together. We do not let it tear them apart. She gestured to the handbag on the chair. So I must ask you to either welcome everyone at this table or find another place to dine. The clinking of cutlery had completely stopped now. The only sounds were the soft jazz from the speakers and the distant hum of traffic outside. The evening had grown dark, and the restaurant's warm lighting created an intimate atmosphere that made the moment feel even more significant. A child's voice suddenly broke through the tension. Mommy, why is that lady being mean? The innocent question seemed to hang in the air, a simple truth that cut through all the complexity of adult prejudices. The woman's hands began to shake slightly as she reached for her handbag. The weight of dozens of eyes upon her, the quiet dignity of Keanu's response, and the united front of the restaurant community had created a moment of reckoning she clearly hadn't expected when she walked in that evening. As she gathered her things, the next few moments would prove to be even more surprising. The situation was about to take another turn, one that would transform this uncomfortable confrontation into a powerful lesson about community, kindness, and the unexpected ways that karma can work. The teenager who had been whispering to his parents couldn't contain himself any longer. He stood up again, this time with more confidence, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. That's Keanu Reeves. The words echoed through the restaurant like a stone dropping into still water, creating ripples of realization that spread from table to table. The woman's hands froze in the middle of gathering her belongings. Her face, already flushed from the confrontation, turned an even deeper shade of red as the magnitude of her mistake began to sink in. The designer handbag she had used to block the seat slipped from her grasp and landed with a soft thud on the wooden floor. Around the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Diners who hadn't recognized him before now looked at Keanu with widening eyes. The college students at the birthday table pulled out their phones, quickly searching for images to confirm what they were hearing. One of them gasped audibly, "It really is him, the guy from The Matrix." An older man dining with his wife leaned forward, squinting through his glasses. "I've seen all his movies," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "My grandkids love him in that movie with the dog." His wife gently corrected him. "That's John Wick, dear." The young woman with the laptop had both hands covering her mouth in shock. She turned to the elderly couple next to her and whispered, though in the quiet restaurant everyone could hear, "He's known for being one of the kindest celebrities in Hollywood. He gives millions to children's hospitals and never even talks about it." More stories began to circulate around the restaurant. A waitress shared how she'd read about Keanu giving up his seat on the subway. Someone else mentioned how he bought ice cream just to sign an autograph for a fan, then gave the ice cream to the cashier. Each story highlighted the stark contrast between his character and the treatment he'd just received. The woman's expensive jewelry seemed to lose its shine as she stood there, reality crashing down around her. She had just discriminated against not only an innocent person but one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, known worldwide for his humility and kindness. A young boy tapped on his mother's sleeve and asked, "Isn't he the one who does his own stunts? The one who gave away most of his money from The Matrix to the costume and effects teams?" His mother nodded, adding, "He's also part Chinese Hawaiian, sweetie. He's proud of his heritage." That last comment seemed to hit the woman particularly hard. She had just publicly discriminated against someone for their Asian heritage, someone who not only embraced his mixed background, but was celebrated globally for his talent, kindness, and humanitarian work. The restaurant's warm lighting now felt like a spotlight on her shame. Every photo on the wall, every face in the crowd, seemed to be watching as her prejudices crumbled in real time. The empty chair she had so fiercely guarded now stood as a symbol of her own ignorance. Mrs. Chen watched it all unfold with quiet wisdom in her eyes. She had seen many things in her decades of running the restaurant, but this moment felt different, like a lesson playing out in real time about judging others and the way karma works in unexpected ways. Through it all, Keanu maintained his humble demeanor. He hadn't moved from his spot by the wall, and his expression remained gentle and understanding. If anything, he seemed almost uncomfortable with the attention now flowing his way, which only served to underscore everything people were saying about his character. The teenage boy who had first recognized him was practically bouncing with excitement. "Mom, remember when he secretly donated to that children's hospital? And how he still rides the subway like a regular person?" His enthusiasm was infectious, causing others to share more stories they'd heard about Keanu's kindness. The woman's carefully constructed world of prejudice was falling apart piece by piece. Each story shared about Keanu's generosity, each example of his humility, each mention of his mixed heritage, all of it served to illuminate the absurdity of her earlier behavior. As the realization of her actions fully sank in, she looked desperately around the restaurant, as if searching for an escape route. But this was a moment of truth she couldn't avoid. The next few minutes would determine how she would handle this public revelation of her prejudice, and whether she could find a way to make amends for her behavior. The evening had turned into something none of the diners had expected when they walked through Angelo's doors. What happened next would not only change the woman's perspective, but would leave a lasting impression on everyone present about the power of humility, the importance of kindness, and the unexpected ways that life teaches its most valuable lessons. The woman's composure crumbled completely as the weight of her actions pressed down on her. She grabbed her handbag from the floor, her hands trembling so much she nearly dropped it again. Her half-eaten plate of fettuccine sat forgotten, a testament to how quickly an ordinary evening had transformed into a life-changing moment. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned toward Keanu, but couldn't quite meet his eyes. "I had no idea. I shouldn't have, regardless of who you..." Each attempt at an apology trailed off unfinished, highlighting how hollow it would sound to apologize only after learning his identity. The restaurant remained unusually quiet, the normal dinner buzz replaced by the sound of her struggle to find the right words. Someone's fork clinked against a plate, the sound sharp in the tense atmosphere. The teenage boy who had first recognized Keanu was still standing, recording everything on his phone despite his mother's attempts to make him sit down. "Please," the woman said, now speaking louder but with a slight shake in her voice. "Take my table. I insist." She began gathering her things with rushed, jerky movements, her expensive bracelet catching on her sleeve as she tried to put on her coat. Keanu finally moved from his spot by the wall, taking a few steps forward. His movement drew everyone's attention, and the restaurant grew even quieter, if that was possible. But instead of approaching the woman's table, he smiled and shook his head gently. "That's very kind," he said, his voice carrying the same calm it had shown throughout the entire incident, "but I wouldn't want to disrupt your dinner." Besides, he gestured toward another table where a group of young fans had been eagerly waving to him. "I think I've got a dinner invitation over there." The college students who had been celebrating a birthday practically jumped out of their seats with excitement. They quickly began rearranging their chairs to make space, their earlier anger at the woman's behavior forgotten in their enthusiasm to welcome Keanu to their celebration. The woman stood frozen, her coat half on, as she watched Keanu walk past her to join the young group. Her attempted apology and offer of a table, meant to save face, had somehow only highlighted the contrast between her behavior and his graciousness. Mrs. Chen stepped forward again, her voice gentle but firm. "I think," she said, looking directly at the woman, "it would be best if you finished your meal another time." She gestured toward the door with a subtle movement of her hand. "My restaurant has served people from all walks of life for 30 years. We cannot make exceptions for intolerance." The woman's face flushed again as she realized she was being asked to leave. She looked around the restaurant, perhaps hoping to find a sympathetic face, but found only turned backs or disappointed expressions. The elderly couple at the communal table had deliberately turned their attention to their pizza, while the young woman with the laptop was openly shaking her head. Meanwhile, at the college students' table, Keanu had sat down amid their warm welcome. He was asking about their celebration, genuinely interested in their stories. Their laughter and excited chatter created a sharp contrast to the uncomfortable scene playing out by the communal table. "But the woman started to protest, then stopped as she realized the futility of her position. Her carefully maintained image of superiority had crumbled, leaving her standing alone in a restaurant full of people who had witnessed her worst moment. As she gathered the last of her belongings, the sounds of genuine connection and joy continued to flow from the birthday celebration table. Keanu was now helping to cut the cake, making sure everyone got a piece, his simple act of kindness creating exactly the kind of inclusive atmosphere she had tried to prevent. The woman's high heels clicked against the wooden floor as she made her way to the door, each step echoing with the weight of her actions. The other diners pretended not to watch her leave, but their sideways glances followed her progress. Just before she reached the door, she paused, her hand on the handle. Through the window, the city lights twinkled in the darkness, a reminder that beyond these walls, life went on. But something had changed, not just in the restaurant, but in the hearts and minds of everyone who had witnessed this evening's events. As she pushed open the door, the little bell above it chiming one last time, it was clear that this night would be remembered for reasons very different from what anyone had expected. The story of what happened next would spread far beyond Angelo's walls, becoming a powerful reminder of how karma works in mysterious ways, and how sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected moments of truth. By the next morning, the video of the incident at Angelo's had spread across social media like wildfire. The teenage boy's recording, though slightly shaky, had captured everything: the discrimination, Keanu's graceful response, and the restaurant's united stand against intolerance. The comments section overflowed with people sharing their own experiences and praising both Keanu's dignity and Mrs. Chen's firm but fair handling of the situation. Local news stations picked up the story, with reporters gathering outside Angelo's the next day. The small Italian restaurant suddenly found itself in the spotlight, but not for its delicious pasta. Instead, it became a symbol of standing up against prejudice and the power of community. Mrs. Chen stood in her restaurant's doorway, surprised by all the attention. She straightened her simple blue apron and spoke to the reporters with the same quiet dignity she'd shown the night before. "In my restaurant," she explained, her voice clear and steady, "we believe food brings people together. When you sit at our tables, you sit as equals." The college students who had welcomed Keanu to their birthday celebration shared their perspective too. "He was so down to earth," one of them told a reporter, still excited from the previous night's events. "He asked about our studies, shared some funny stories from his movies, and even insisted on helping clean up after the cake. You'd never know he was this huge star." Inside Angelo's, the communal table had become something of an attraction. Customers requested to sit there, sharing their own stories and discussing how the previous night's events had affected them. The elderly couple who had witnessed everything returned for lunch, bringing their grandchildren to teach them an important lesson about standing up for what's right. The young woman with the laptop created a social media post about her experience, which quickly went viral. "I watched someone choose hate and saw how it consumed them. Then I watched someone choose kindness and saw how it lifted everyone up. Thank you, Keanu Reeves, for showing us the power of dignity in the face of prejudice." 2 days after the incident, something unexpected happened. The woman from that night returned to Angelo's during a quiet afternoon. She looked different, humbled, without the designer clothes and flashy jewelry. Her hands clutched a letter as she asked to speak with Mrs. Chen. The restaurant fell quiet as she read her public apology, her voice trembling but sincere. "I spent the past 2 days thinking about my actions and the hurt I caused," she admitted. "Seeing myself through others' eyes was a wake-up call. I'm not proud of who I was that night, but I'm grateful for the lesson it taught me." Mrs. Chen listened patiently, then did something surprising. She invited the woman to sit down for a cup of tea. They talked for over an hour, sharing stories about their lives, their families, and their experiences. It wasn't just an apology being accepted, it was a bridge being built. The woman didn't stop there. She wrote a lengthy post on her professional social media account, acknowledging her mistake and announcing her commitment to take diversity and inclusion training. She even offered to fund a scholarship for minority students at the local culinary school, turning her moment of shame into an opportunity for positive change. Keanu himself stayed quiet about the incident, true to his humble nature, but his actions spoke volumes. A week later, Angelo's received a surprise delivery. A brand new communal table, larger than the old one, with a small plaque that read, "At this table, all are welcome. KR." The restaurant's regular customers noticed more changes too. Mrs. Chen added a new section to the menu called Community Favorites, featuring dishes from various cultures. The walls gained new decorations, photographs of people from all walks of life sharing meals and laughs at the communal table. Local schools began bringing students to Angelo's for special lessons about community and acceptance. Mrs. Chen would tell them the story, always ending with the same message. Sometimes the best meals are not about the food, but about who we choose to be when we sit at the table together. The incident had transformed Angelo's from a simple Italian restaurant into something more, a symbol of how one moment of confrontation, handled with dignity and grace, could ripple out to touch countless lives. The new communal table was always full now, with strangers becoming friends over plates of pasta and conversations about life. On quiet evenings, when the sun set and cast long shadows through the restaurant's windows, regulars would sometimes point to the empty chair that had started it all. They'd tell newcomers the story, not to shame anyone, but to remind everyone that change is possible, that kindness is powerful, and that sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected moments at unexpected tables in unexpected places.